Power of Four. Shift your perspective to change your life. Hello, welcome to the Power of Four, where we learn to shift our perspective from what we're against to what we're for. I'm Jenny Capella, and today I'm having a conversation with Aypril Porter about her work with human design. Now, human design is a tool, a holistic system really for self-awareness. And it's a combination of elements from other different tools, and April will expound upon this much further, but I Ching, I should say, Kabbalah, quantum physics, astrology, and it helps us uncover and discover our unique blueprint so that we can learn to live in alignment with that. And we all have a purpose, we all have a reason that we came here. And this tool is very a powerful way to help us discover that. And then what happens is we learn to shift away from being against ourselves, being out of flow, out of sync with ourselves, trying to shoehorn ourselves into relationships, into jobs, circumstances that aren't quite a fit. Sometimes they just feel a little off. Sometimes they feel a lot off. But shifting from that into what we're for, which is for our purpose, for our life, for what we came here to be in the first place. So Aypril works in a coaching perspective with individuals. She works with relationships and family relationships. And she has a world passion for working with parents to help them parent their kids according to the child's unique blueprint design. And she'll be speaking a lot more about that. And she's written a book, and the book is called Parenting the Child You Have, Reimagining the Parent-Child Relationship Through the Lens of Human Design. So with that, I will say, welcome, Aypril. Thank you so much for being here, and love to hear a little bit about your background, what led you to human design work in particular, and anything else you'd like to say that expounds upon my very brief definition of human design.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Human design found me in 2015. I was working in a sensory deprivation float center as a nutrition professional, and an email came through one day that was talking about human design. And of course, being in nutrition, I was like, wait, are we genetically modifying people now? What is happening? I was like, red flag, red flag.
Yeah.
But I looked it up, and it was this system that I'd never seen before, but I was deeply intrigued by. And I'm somebody who's taking all the tests, right? Like, give me the Myers-Briggs, give me all the personality typing tests. I'm just curious, like, what does it say? What does it mean? What is here for me? And so when I saw this system, it was different because it's based on your birth date, time, and place, just like astrology. So there's an element to it that's very different than, say, the Enneagram or Myers-Briggs, because those things are systems that we are self-identifying into. We're saying, this is what I am. This is who I am. This is my personality trait. These are the things that I do or say, or how I express myself in the world. But human design is like, here's the blueprint of who you came here to be. This is the inherent energy you have. And are you showing up as this person, or are you conditioned by the world and the family that raised you and the people around you to hide that part of yourself? And so for me, it's the thing that gives us permission to step back into our true authentic selves and not feel bad about it.
That is so powerful. And while you're on that vein, I thought I would share the chart that we have here. This is a generic chart, just so that you can kind of talk a little bit about this. And we'll do a show and tell here for the audience.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this chart is what we call the body graph. And there's a couple variations of this, but this is the one we most commonly see. So this image in the middle is like the body. And all of those shapes that are in the middle, the squares and the triangles, and the heart in the middle, those are what we call centers. They're energy centers, and they correlate with the chakra system. So we have like the head, the ajna, the throat, the G center or identity center, the sacral center, the root center, and then we have one about the splenic center, the emotional center, and the will center. So these all correlate with that part of the system that we're pulling from. So these correlate with the chakra system. And then we have the lines that go between these things. Those are called channels. And then at the end of each channel, there's a number, and those are gates. So all of these are important parts of the chart, and they are based on where the planets were in the human design system at the moment you were born and about 3 months before. There's 2 dates that we're working with when we run a chart, but it's all configured automatically, so we don't have to know all that. And this just shows us more about how we operate in the world and how we interact with one another.
That's incredible. There's so much to it. And did it take you a while to have to learn this? Does it generally take people a long time?
Yeah, so my experience with it was different than some people, but I've heard this from a lot of people too. So I think it's kind of a mixed bag of how people interact with it. But I had a lot of interest in it, but it felt like I was reading another language I couldn't understand.
Hmm.
It was something that I was like, I can't understand what this means, but I keep coming back for more. And I kept coming back for more, and I kept coming back for more. And eventually pieces would make sense. And what I realized was that we can only take in what we're ready for. Right. And I wasn't ready for the entire thing. I was only ready for the first pieces of it. And when I
Mm.
mastered those pieces, then I could take on the next level and the next level and the next level. And then the bigger picture started to form and I could see the whole thing. So it took me a while. I would say it probably took me a good couple of years to really dance with it and feel like, okay, I kind of understand really the big picture here. Um, and then it's a lifelong process, right? We're always learning about the chart. We always see something new in the chart. We always relate to it differently. We're always growing and evolving.
I don't think I've ever heard of a tool that is so richly complex in the sense that it's talking about the body and the chakras and the different systems and the energy flows. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about the energy flows. Tell me, like you said that came from the astrology, or did you say that was from something else? The actual part about the flows and through the different pathways and the gates.
So the gates are actually aligned with the I Ching. So the 64
Mm.
gates of the I Ching, there's 64 gates in the human design chart. And they actually come from there. So if you go look at the I Ching, you will see information that aligns with this. So this system is a compilation of parts of other systems, and I think we have to give credit to those original systems. This is just a really fascinating way of overlaying parts of these tools into a different picture. We're just looking through a different lens. And so I think that what it shows is, when I talk about the energy flowing, we look at what is colored in the chart as something that is defined and consistent within us. We have a consistent way of being in relationship to that type of energy. So in this chart, there's a orange square, the third one down from the top, and this is what we call the throat center. So this is somebody who has a consistent way of speaking. When
Mm.
they speak in the world, it's very consistent. And if this were open or undefined, white in color, this would mean that their voice varies depending on who they're with or what is happening in the transits of the human design system right now. So they may find that their voice takes on um, different sounds, different qualities even. They might be good at impersonating other people even. But really they find that they express themselves differently when they're around different people. So energy is very I don't even know what the word I'm looking for is. It's just very open to being influenced by other people when it is white in the chart, and it's much more consistent when it's colored in.
Hmm. And are those things impacted, whether it's white or colored in, impacted by the day you were born and the time? Is that kind of that part is the astrology in terms of the coloring in or?
Anything that's colored in was in the transits at the moment or 3 months before your birth.
Mm.
So those numbers that are down the sides of the chart in the red and the black boxes,
Mhm.
those are planets, and then there's gates and lines in there, and that is the gate that that planet was in at the moment of your birth. And then on the red side, it's 3 months before your birth. So
That's
that's what shows
interesting.
up in the middle graph. It colors in all those little gates. And then when we have connections, then it defines lines. And then when those lines are colored in, then the centers on either side are colored in.
What's the significance of charting 3 months before? That's fascinating.
So the right side of the chart is the conscious, or we'll say the mind side of the chart. The red is the unconscious or body side of the chart. And so it's just two different blueprints of energy. And when they come together, it's fascinating because we can look at them separately, but we're never just one part of ourselves,
Yeah.
right? So we always have to look at it in a whole big picture. But sometimes when we pull it apart a little bit and we look at the conscious side of the chart, the black side, we can see things that we more easily identify in ourselves because we're more in contact with that.
Mm.
This left side, the red is the body or the unconscious side, is the stuff that the longer we live, the more we get in contact with those elements of ourselves because we see it play out over time. But the younger we are, it can be harder and more elusive to kind of see those things until we've had more experiences in life.
Interesting. So 3 months before, I wonder what that, I mean, I don't know if you know the answer, if there even is an answer, but it's just fascinating to me that it's 3 months, not 4 months or 6 months or something.
So it's actually 88 astrological degrees, which is
Mm.
roughly about 3 months.
I see. Okay.
So it's an astrological calculation.
Got it. This reminds me somewhat of biology books I used to see way back when that had the different transparencies where you'd turn down one page and you'd see just the organs, then you'd overlay the skeleton and overlay the next page. Kind
Yeah.
of reminds me of that a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great image.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I know that you have different ways that you work with people on this, for example, and I'd just love to start talking about those kind of, I'll list them one at a time. So the first one is reparenting, which is something that I've done a lot of work with on myself over my course of my life. And I love the fact that this tool can be used for that. So tell us about your work with that.
Yeah. So in reparenting, it's kind of funny because in every approach that we're looking at this chart, it's really the same thing. It's just we're slightly moving the lens, right? So we're looking at who are we at our core? Who are we? What is the energy we came here with? Who are we expressing ourselves to be? And then we can look at a parent's chart and we can say, okay, so for example, in this chart that we're looking at, the heart in the middle is white or undefined. That is the identity center. There's love, direction, and identity in this center. That's what we're looking at there. So this would be somebody who is very open to the identities around them. They are not designed to be fixed in their identity. If we put them into 10 different groups of very different people, each group would come back and say, oh, this person is very much like us, right? So if the person had a defined G center or identity center, we put them in 10 different groups. All the information that would come back would be very consistent. All those same groups would say this person is very consistently this same person, not like each of the individual groups, but like their own person in this very specific way. One is not better than the other. I want to be really clear about that. There's nothing bad in the chart. And sometimes that is expressed of like, oh, I don't have this, or I only have this, or I have this thing in the chart that's hard. We all have challenges in the chart, and there's all good stuff in the chart. Nothing is bad in the chart. It's how we relate to it. So back to the reparenting. So if a parent had this defined, then it could influence how this child grows up to see themselves. They could see themselves as similar to the parent. The
Mm.
parent may be into like art, for example, and painting. And so this child grows up thinking that they are really into art and painting. And then they go move out onto their own and they go, I don't really like that anymore.
Uh,
And they go, well, why don't I like it? What's wrong with me? Why am I not this person anymore? And they have this old identity of I am somebody who is an artist, or I am somebody who enjoys art. And maybe they don't really. So there's this element where they kind of come into conflict, and it's like, who am I then?
mm.
And so this is one element where we can have reparenting as an opportunity of like, who am I as an individual versus who am I when I'm with my family of origin, the people who
Mm.
raised me. Um, we can see somebody who has a parent with the center on the bottom that on the very bottom of the chart, there's a square and it's white in this chart. If the parent had this colored in, this is the root center. We feel adrenaline and pressure come up through this root center. This is somebody who may feel the pressure of other people and their demands. So if a parent has this defined and says, can you take out the garbage next time you go out? This child might hear it as, you need to take out the garbage right now.
Interesting.
Yeah. It can
Wow.
sound very different depending on what's in your chart. And so, there's an opportunity to reparent yourself and say, I don't have to jump when somebody says do something. I need to take a step back and say, is this actually something I need to do right now? Or am I hearing it as something I need to do right now?
That is fascinating.
And we could look at every element of the chart and do the same thing. So these are just a couple of big examples of how that can show up. But there's an opportunity to reparent ourselves and say, okay, well, I felt like I didn't get this thing from my parent, right? So maybe as another big example, the emotional center. We have one emotional center in this chart, and this chart actually has a lot of activations off of it. It's the like orangish colored triangle on the right side of the chart towards the bottom. That one. Yeah, so this is somebody who has an emotional wave. They feel their emotions all the time. They're always moving through the ups and downs of a wave. And this actually has two different types of waves. So if you have a parent who has this open, they take in the emotional energy, they amplify it, because anything that we have white in our chart, we take in energy from others and amplify.
Hmm.
And it's foreign to them to hold that much emotional energy, and so they want to release it. They may project it back out on you. They may project it on other people. They may shut down and avoid confrontation. They may shut down and avoid talking about their feelings. So there can be a lot of hurt potential here between a parent and child if this is not a place where these things align. So if you have an emotionally defined and an emotionally undefined person, the child who has all of these emotions, children express emotions, right? Like they're very expressive. And to the parent, it may feel so overwhelming that they avoid
Mm.
all of that emotion. So the child feels like my parent didn't love me. They didn't give me the affection I wanted. They didn't support me when I felt these big emotions. And it may just be that that parent didn't know how to understand or hold that emotion for them.
Mm.
So we have the opportunity to say, okay, I see this in my parent's chart. Maybe they just didn't have the capacity or the tools to understand what was happening for them. And now I can give myself what I need. I can forgive them. I can let that go. And I can also say, I have emotions. I am an emotional being, and there's nothing wrong with that. We just have to be responsible with how we express our emotions towards people.
Absolutely. So when I look at this chart, and I think like for this triangle area here, if something gets stopped up by our experience with our parents, where they just maybe project back onto us, does something happen with these energy channels at all, or is that not part of this?
No, we really become conditioned in that area.
Mm.
So this may lead, for this example that I just gave, it may lead this child, assuming this is the child, to avoid trying to show emotion, like try and suppress it. It may make them feel like if I because attachment theory, right? So we always want to be attached to our parents. We
Yeah.
depend on them for survival. And so if I show my emotion and mom runs away, I'm going to learn not to show my emotion. I'm going to learn to just stuff all of my feelings inside and hold on to them very tightly. And what happens when we do that? We create illness and disease in our body because that emotion is energy in motion, but it's not in motion anymore. We're suppressing it and holding it so tightly that something has to happen with it.
Yeah, absolutely. It needs to flow, or it's just going to keep staying there. As you says, it can create illness and disease, even if it's not physical, still emotionally, there will always be some sense of lack of peace. And, we've been talking about reparenting, and I'd love to have you talk about the parenting work and really what drew you into that, the fascination that you have and the passion you have for that, and then eventually to write a book and a companion workbook with the book.
um, let's see what led me to that. I don't know. I think probably just because I was so fascinated by this system, and when I looked it up, there are basically 5 different energy types: the generator, the manifesting generator, the manifester, the projector, and the reflector. Um, and so we all fall into one of those categories. And the generators and manifesting generators represent about 70% of the population. Um, projectors are about 20%, manifestors are around 8 or 9%, and then reflectors are about 1 or less percent of the population. So when I looked it up, myself, my mom, and my kids are all projectors. And I thought, this is fascinating. but we're so different.
Mm,
Because you think about like maybe the Enneagram or some of these other personality typings, and you think, well, we have similar traits because we fall into these similar categories. But it doesn't really work that simply with human design. Like, yes, your energy moves in a certain way when you have one of these energy patterns, but there's so much nuance in the chart that we can't look at two projectors and say, oh, they're pretty similar.
mm,
They can be wildly different. And, you know, even when we look at this chart, this is an emotional manifesting generator. And a manifesting generator has a large source of energy, and they can make things happen quickly because they have this connection from their sacral center, which is where the power and energy comes from, directly to the throat where we manifest things. So when they speak, people hear them. Um, and we typically see a manifesting generator chart with a lot more of these centers colored in than we see in this chart. This chart only has 3 things colored in. So this is kind of rare. It's really open. So there's a lot of potential for conditioning to come through a chart like this. But this person may have had a family of manifesting generators, and they had a lot more definition in their chart.
mm.
So their experience would be very different. So when we look at a family and we say, okay, we have, 4 projectors in this family or 3 generators or whatever it is, we can't assume that they're all so similar. Like there are similar qualities, but then we have to look at the nuance. So this is where it became really fascinating to me, is when I looked at my kids' charts. Me as a projector, I have 7 of these 9 centers colored in, and that's kind of rare for a projector. I
Mm.
have one child who has 2 of them colored in. So she's very open to the world around her and being influenced. So what I learned through my experience was that my emotions, because I have that emotional wave, I create those emotions every day. I'm always moving through them. And she doesn't. She's really taking that in. She's taking my identity in. She's taking my fears and my instincts and my intuition in. She's taking my willpower in. She's taking my emotions in. She's taking my voice and all of these things. And
Mm.
so as a parent, if I'm aware of this, then how I interact with her can be different. I can let go of maybe some expectations that I may have had because of how I was raised. So this is a common thing I see, is like people will come in and they'll say, my child is doing this, that, or the other, and I don't understand because I didn't do this as a kid. This didn't work this way for me. I don't understand why this isn't working for them. And then we look at a chart and we can see these big differences, and we can say, okay, this child just needs something different than you do. So if we understand what this child needs and we understand what the parent needs, we can get both of your needs met without having to compromise who you are.
That's significant, not having to compromise. And so in the case where a child needs something that's maybe a little foreign, for lack of a better word, to the parent, or not in the parent's typical experience, is there a way that you can use the chart to coach them and help them learn how to work with that child?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a large part of what we do is looking at, okay, what are the concerns that are coming up in your family or in your relationship with this child? And then, okay, how does this show up in the chart? And how might you approach this differently based on what you now know? And I always want to say that working with human design, it's an experiment, right? It is not a hard and fast rule. Like there are no it's not designed to put you in a box. It's designed to liberate you.
Mm.
And so sometimes I see people say, I have this, I can't do that. This is in my chart, so I'm limited in this way. And that's not true. We're not limited by our chart. Um, and so I just want to say that, when we look at it as a tool, we can use it to find solutions for what we're experiencing rather than a limiting belief or reinforcing that limiting belief.
Yeah. And so when you set about to write this book, what were some of the elements that you cover in the book?
Um, so when I wrote this book, it was 2021, and we were all
Mm.
still at home. And I just felt this huge inspiration to write this book. And I wrote the entire book in about 5 weeks. Um,
Oh,
I don't, it was one of those things where people say, I felt like it was written through me, and it
Mm.
felt like that. Because no matter where I was or what I was doing, I could sit down and I could just write on this book. I didn't have to think about it. I was just writing. But my intention behind it was to help bring human design to people who don't want to learn the system, who don't want to study it for years to figure it out, but they want information that they can use now. So with this book, I tried to bring the language down to a level where it was easy to understand and give a lot of examples and real life connection to the elements of the chart so that it's actually usable.
Interesting. So I know that in addition to parenting and reparenting, you also work with people having peace at the end of their lives. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah. Well, okay. So imagine you live 80 years of your life and feel like you never fit in.
Mm, yeah.
And now you're facing a terminal illness and you think, why can't I just be like other people? Why did I have such a hard time? We can look at the chart and we can normalize the pain that this person has felt.
Mm,
We can help them understand that this was not a character flaw. This was not a problem within you. This was society trying to fit you into this box that you weren't never designed to fit into. And when people can understand that about themselves, that there's nothing wrong with them, it's just that society has tried to make us fit into something that we're not. We get this freedom, this peace to be okay with ourselves, to be okay with the path that we've walked. And a lot of people, that's enough at the end of life.
hmm. That's extraordinary. There's all kinds of application for that with people, maybe if they're end of life and at home, or if they're in hospice care or something like that. That's
Mhm.
just really phenomenal. And then I know also you work with people who have experienced the death of a family member too. And I'd love to hear about that as well.
Yeah. So in that case, there's often a unresolved conflict, right? So we all have those people in our lives that challenge us, that we just can't seem to like get along as easily as we can with other people. And sometimes we're related to those people. And that is our path, our challenge in this life to grow through and evolve. And sometimes we don't find that peace between us, either because we haven't gotten there or because that person has not been open to exploring that. We can't make anybody grow. We can't make anybody do the work that they're not ready to do.
Yeah.
All we can do is work on ourselves. And so sometimes when someone dies, especially a family member, and there's been that conflict, that they felt like they were never seen, they were never heard, they never understood this person, or this person never understood them. When we look at their charts together, we can often make sense of why this is. We can often look at what you felt was real because
Mm,
this person was maybe living out this lower expression of this chart,
mm.
and maybe you weren't, or maybe you both were. Right? And now you've evolved, or maybe you haven't, but we can understand why this conflict was here. And if we can see that, it gives a lot of peace and it allows that person to grieve the person as the, and I will say that this doesn't always happen immediately, right? Like sometimes we have to sit with this, we have to come back and process this over and over. But when we can make peace with who this person was, and that it wasn't a personal attack on us of how they were, we can actually grieve them. We can actually be at peace with the loss in the best capacity that we can.
So if I'm hearing you, it's kind of like, it's more of a clean loss, if you will, rather than being overlaid by things that were incomplete and unresolved.
Yeah, I think it just allows for more closure.
Hmm.
You know, all the things that we can't say, um we can't find that common point between. We can't have that conversation maybe. We can look at these charts after and we can say, okay, well, that conflict you had, this is part of their design. They were designed to provoke people. Because there are elements of the chart that are designed to provoke. These are the people that are going to go out and change the world. And the
Hmm.
highest expression of this is like that Martin Luther King Jr. energy, right? Like we're here to stir things up because we're here to change the way that we are doing things. But sometimes people get stuck in a lower vibration of that energy, and it just is provocation for the sake of provocation. And so when we can see that in a chart and go, oh, this person was just provoking me all the time, it wasn't me, right? There's nothing wrong with me. It's just that this is an energy that they carried and they didn't know how to understand or work with it. They
Hmm,
didn't understand its highest purpose.
that's really powerful. It reminds me, listening to you also about epigenetics and thinking about, on a genetic level, how the theory, of carrying other people from our ancestral line and ending up doing the work for them that they didn't do too. Is there any relation at all to this, or is that kind of its own discipline, if you will?
It's its own thing, but we can look at that, and we can also look at the patterns through generations. Because here's another interesting thing about human design is that our design is related, like my design is related to my grandparents, and my kids are related to my parents.
Oh, interesting.
Our designs are similar. They're never going to look the same, like
Mhm.
exact same chart or anything, but there's going to be elements and themes that are the same. So here's where it gets interesting in parenting and reparenting is that when we are growing up, we are imprinted by the family that we live with, right? And their designs. And then we move out on our own and we go do our own thing and we realize, okay, I'm this independent person and this is who I am. Then we have kids, and those kids have similar qualities to our parents. So we get to go right back through it, and we get to have an opportunity to interact with that energy in a new way.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah. It gets really interesting. So we can look at the epigenetic piece and say, this is something that we keep doing in this family. Why do we keep doing this? And then we can look at the chart and say, okay, there are these elements of the chart that can correlate with this. It doesn't mean it's not causation, right? It's correlation.
Mm.
And if we see that, how do I want to be in relationship with this energy? Do I want to continue this pattern because this is what I've known? Or do I want to choose something different so that my kids have something different, so their kids have something different? So we can change epigenetics through awareness.
Right. And then I was also thinking about two people who are, let's say, married or in a relationship of some kind, and they're parenting. So then there's the overlay of their relationship, I would imagine,
Mhm.
and their children. And then do you ever work with people on learning how to come together to into agreement or consensus about without compromising each other's individual blueprints, if you will, in terms of parenting their children?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. Most people, when I have a family come to me, one parent is interested in it, the other parent is usually not.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what do we do with that? We look at the people who are willing to show up and make the changes. And the interesting thing is that when they start changing, when they start doing their work, the people around them start responding to them differently. And the change happens. So, we don't have to force anybody into that change, but we can see the other person's chart and understand who they are at their core, how they are designed to interact with the world, and then we can adjust ourselves so that we are interacting with them in a way that promotes their highest self to have an opportunity to be seen. And so we can look at 5 different charts in a family and say, okay, this person needs more quiet time. This person needs more activities and sports and physical release of energy. This one needs quiet reading time, and make sure that everybody's getting their needs met and that it's not wrong for any of them to opt out of reading or opt out of sports or whatever it is. When we allow that person to be who they are and give them what they need, the whole family becomes happier.
This reminds me of situations where there's a person, child, and they turn into a teenager and they really like to do mechanical things. Maybe they hands-on and their parents say, well, you have to go to college, you have to get a degree and you got to do something to give yourself earn a living. Meanwhile, apprenticeships and the trades create incredible living wages for people and a lot of stability. But our school system typically, that's better than it was, but still, there's not as much of an emphasis on the alternative of going into alternative college, of going into a trade. So is this something you can also see those kinds of things in a child's human design?
I mean, I think we can see qualities that lend themselves to certain professions, but I wouldn't say that we see somebody who is more suited for college versus trade school. That's it. It doesn't. I just think that we're getting down into putting people into those buckets again if we get that far. So we want to say, this is somebody maybe who has a lot of logic in their chart.
Mm,
They need to figure things out more scientifically. They need that process, but they could be an entrepreneur and have that process. They don't need to go to college. They could be a mechanic. They could be a professor. Like there's so many ways that this could show up. I think we would be doing a disservice to try and type them into one of those categories.
yeah.
But we can say, okay, this person has a lot of logic in their chart. They really need to work things out in this way. This other person has a lot of knowing. They just know things. Like it just comes to them. There's this inherent knowing. And then we have the abstract learners who just have to go through it, right? Like there's just the process of going through it that they have to do. Um, and then there's other elements of the chart like profile where we look at, I think this is a little more closely related with personality. Like in this chart, we're looking at somebody who's a 5-1 profile. And the 5 in human design is the heretic, and the first line is the investigator. And so the fifth line is here to universalize knowledge. So this could be somebody who's really good at taking complex ideas and bringing them to people in a more tangible way, right? So we can take these big concepts and say, okay, here's the usable information.
Mm,
Um, but there's also an element with the fifth line where people project onto the fifth line person that they can save them, that they are going to rescue them. So the projection field is like a karmic mirror, right? So what we see in the person with the fifth line is what we actually need to heal within ourselves.
mm,
And this is one of the most healing things because I actually also have a fifth line profile. And this was one of the most healing parts of the chart, learning about it for me, was that these things that people have said to me or told me, and I was just so confused by, like, I'm not this way. I don't understand how this relationship ended up in this this state that it's in because I don't feel like I did these things that you're telling me I've done or how I've behaved. And I have even gone back through messages, like a couple of years of messages to be like, am I imagining this? And then once I learned about human design in this projection field, I realized that was this other person's stuff being projected on me like it was mine, but it was actually theirs to heal, but they just didn't see it yet.
mm,
So I felt like there was something wrong with me. And I started questioning myself, like, what? And I'm not saying I'm perfect. Like, we all have our stuff, right?
yeah.
But in this relationship, I thought, I really don't remember doing or being the way that this person is describing me. And then I was like, what? I feel like they're talking about themselves, but this doesn't make any sense. And then understanding the karmic mirror, it's a perfect explanation for how this happens. And so for me, it was that way to release some of these things that I was like, why? Why did this relationship implode the way it did, or whatever happened to it? And so just understanding that and realizing, like, when you step into a relationship with someone, you're stepping into that energetic field. And so with the fifth line, you have to be careful of what you promise or say you're going to do because other people will project that you're going to save them. And
That's really interesting.
if you don't, your reputation suffers because they're going to say, you failed. You didn't do what you said you were going to, even if you didn't agree to it. It was just kind of, they thought that you were going to save them. So it's a really fascinating profile. It's probably the fifth and sixth line are the most complex. I would say that the fifth line has the most facets to it. But then you also have, and this is the conscious side, so this is what we're aware of. Then the first line in this profile is the investigator. It's somebody who needs information. They like to get to the bottom of things. They like to research. They like to get to like I'm trying to think of the word,
Like the very
source information.
hmm.
right? So they don't want hearsay. They want to go to the source. They want to find out where this came from and what it means so that they know how they're going to apply it to their life or the world. And so this is somebody who is here to universalize information and share, but also really has this need for a foundation of solid information.
Hmm. Now, when you were talking about this, the 5 line being people, so people might project onto them and then blame them later if they felt that they weren't delivering because it was some kind of unconscious part of themselves they were projecting. So was it kind of also like, Jung and his golden shadow? I think he called it a golden shadow, where he talked about people projecting also, they're not owning their positive traits, their strengths, and putting it on that person and turning them almost into a god, or, putting them on a pedestal, if you will. Is that part of the 5th line as well?
Oh, I have to think about that. Because when you are in the right projection field, people see you for who you are and they see what you're capable of, and it feels right because you feel seen. A lot of the
Mm.
times you're stepping into this projection field where people aren't seeing you. And so I think the need or the desire of the 5th line is somebody please just see me.
Mm.
Not what you want in me or what you want from me, but see me for me and what I have to offer and who I am. And so there's this pain that's created of walking around feeling like they're looking for connection, but nobody really sees them.
Interesting. And how many lines are there? I think you said earlier, but I'm not recalling.
There's 6 lines.
6 lines. Okay. Can you talk a little bit just briefly about each line?
Yeah. So there's the profiles are a combination of the 2 lines. There's 12 different profile possibilities. But the combinations are lines 1 through 6. So line 1 is the investigator. We talked about that. That's the person who has the need for information and likes to get to the bottom of things. And these come from the I Ching. So the I Ching starts at line 1 at the bottom and goes up to 6. So the first line is a foundation. That's why it needs information. And the second line is the hermit. This is somebody who is a natural. They're just they take information in from the world and they retreat into their hermitage and they convert it into knowledge. And they can get lost in their hermitage until someone pulls them out because it's cozy in there. They don't like to be projected on that they know things. They like to just go quietly about their business and not be bothered. And so it can be hard sometimes to get them to come out of their hermitage once they've gone in. But there's like this vortex that kind of happens where people will call them out. All of a sudden it'll be like, hey, I haven't talked to you in a while. Come out and hang out with me or whatever. And so they do get pulled back out into the world, but their fear is that somebody's going to ask them to prove what they know. Then we have the third line, which is in human design, it's called the martyr, but I like to call it the experiential learner. So this is somebody who learns by doing. It's that trial and error kind of process of learning. And this is somebody who can shut down that quality because they feel like they don't always get it right. Or as children, they get told, why are you messing that up? Why did you do it that way? That didn't work, right? So there's this criticism that can happen when things don't go as planned. Or if a parent can see how something's not going to work and the kid does it anyway, then there can sometimes be criticism. So it's about this person learning, like, this is their process. They're going to get it wrong before they get it right. And that's okay. That's just part of their process. They're learning something every time. With every wrong step, we learn something new about how to get it right. So they're the experiential learner. And then we have the fourth line, which is the opportunist. And so this is somebody that I call the networker. They're another foundational line of the upper trigram. So they need information to feel secure. So if they are going to move to a new location or they're going to get a new job, they're going to have a job lined up before they let go of their current job. They're going to go check out that new city that they want to live in before they actually commit to living there. And they receive most of their opportunities through their network of people. So they may have a small core of individuals that they really deeply connect and share with, but they know a lot of people. And so their resources, their housing, their jobs, their relationships, their opportunities come through this wide network of people. And these are the people that, like, if they're in business, they're going to want a referral system because that's how they're going to get business. And then the fifth line we talked about being the heretic. And then the sixth line is the role model. And so when we talk about children, this can feel like a really heavy title, right? The role model. But the sixth line goes through 3 phases in life. So from birth until the first Saturn return, which is around age 28 or 30, they live their life as more like the third line profile. So that experiential learner, learning by doing, trying, having lots of experiences. And then from their first Saturn return to their Chiron return, so around age 30 to around age 50, they in human design they go on the roof, which means that they go into this kind of reflective state where they retreat, they slow down a bit, and they reflect on all of their third line kind of experiential learning processes and everything they've done in their life to figure out, like, what's the direction of my life? What do I really want to do with my life? What's really important to me? And so when they come off of the roof at the Chiron return around 50, if they haven't done that internal work of reflecting and trying to like figure out, who am I and what am I doing? Where am I going in my life? They can have a bit of a bumpy landing, and sometimes relationships will fall apart. Sometimes careers will shift drastically. They will just up and move. Like all kinds of things will happen because it's not happening to them. It's happening for them, right? It's unwinding what is not working so that they can align with their correct path. And then from there on, they emerge as the role model. But the role model isn't about what they're doing. It's about who they're being. It's about being their true authentic self and following their correct path. And when they do that, they show others how to be themselves, their authentic selves. So it's not about the doing, it's about the being.
That's interesting. One thing I was thinking while you were speaking to was of the concept of people who've gone through various amounts of trauma in their life. And there's the trauma, if I'm hearing you correctly, associated that could happen with somebody not understanding somebody else's blueprint, right? And just treating them unfairly at best, right? But what about kind of the overlay of other kinds of more severe trauma? Is that kind of a separate topic that isn't necessarily accessed through this particular chart blueprint? Or can you find help for that person, maybe how they process the trauma through their own blueprint?
So it's a little bit tricky because trauma is that conditioning, right? And how we relate to that is how we see ourselves. But when we can show somebody their blueprint and we can show them this is the inherent energy that you have, and this is maybe the energy that the person who inflicted this pain in your life has. And sometimes we can't always see that, right? We don't always have their chart.
Yeah.
But we can see where they may be open to have received imprinting from somebody else who is wounded themselves. That can be a huge catalyst of change, of opening that door to saying, I don't have to tell this story anymore. Yes, these horrible things happened to me, but I choose to tell a more empowering story so that I create something new and better in my life. I'm not saying that this didn't happen. I'm saying this was awful. This was horrible. And I'm not going to continue carrying this story.
That's powerful. So when you work with people, what are some of your favorite things to talk about? I mean, obviously parenting, reparenting, et cetera, but is there anything else you'd like to tell us about? Like, do you like to work with parents and their child present too? Or, things like that?
Usually I don't work with the children present too. It's usually the parent that I'm working with. Not that I wouldn't, it's just usually not the case. What I really love is hearing people's stories. I want to know who you are. I want to hear about the things that have been challenging in your life. And I want to show you in your chart that it doesn't have to be that painful. I want to normalize what you've experienced and help you tell a better story for your future.
Interesting. And that can happen even at the end of life too, like what you were saying earlier, or the death of somebody, death of a family member. So another thing I thought of is the school system. And I can just imagine that the school system actually, no, let me say this a different way. Do you think in your experience that the school system, just in general, is set up in a way that favors a certain kind of line or blueprint just unconsciously?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it favors logic, and we are not all logical beings. And so logic says A plus B equals C. And sometimes A plus Z equals 1, 2, 3, right? Like it doesn't always align. And so it's very challenging for these kids who are abstract learners or who just know things or who
Yeah.
pick up information so easily that they don't have to do the homework
Mm,
because they're stuck doing all of this busy work that they don't see the point in, and they lose interest and they act out or they just don't do their homework and they fail out. But it's not because they're not smart, it's because the system is not teaching for them.
mm.
And so I think that it's really designed in this logical, linear way of learning. And I would say that the majority of people don't really learn that way. It's just logic makes sense, right? It
Yeah,
makes sense,
right. Exactly. Yeah.
but it doesn't for most people. So that's a place that we can help our children too, is like, okay, if the school system says this, how can we work with this system knowing who you are?
That would be profound. What a difference that could make, at least at the very fact of in the home, if they're trying to help and support the child and nurture them. It's like, hey, okay, this is what you're learning in school. I know it's very logic oriented or whatever, but how else might you see it? Tell me what your opinions are. What is your experience in school? What's that been like for you?
Mhm.
That's just profound, I think.
And I think we can also advocate for our children too. If we can see that they are not that logical learner,
Mm,
how
mhm,
can we approach this a little bit differently? How can we have a conversation with their teacher and say, my student learns best this way? Can we adapt this assignment to be a little bit different?
mm. That's a great idea.
Not every teacher is going to accept that, but there
Yeah,
are teachers who will.
yeah.
And there are teachers who are working with the human design system. There's a woman, I know her name is Ellen Hefty, and she has a program that she teaches to, I believe, teachers and to parents to help
Hmm.
them understand their kids in a very basic way. And so there are teachers who are trying to bring it into the school system.
That's exciting. I hope
Yeah.
that expands over time. That would be great.
Yeah.
So I know that we could talk about so many things related to this on a much deeper level, but just for now, is there anything else you'd like to say to the listeners about the system, your work, anything at all before we wrap up?
I would just say that this system is probably one of the most profound systems I've found. And what I love about it is that it doesn't put you in a box. If you're using it correctly, it is freedom. It is an experience, right? It's nothing that you are going to logically or quickly learn. It's something that's going to evolve over time. It evolves with you. And so
Mm,
you don't have to learn everything. You don't have to learn a majority of it. You don't even have to learn a lot of it. You just need to learn the next couple steps and apply that to your life. And that's where the richness comes in, is when you apply the things that you know,
mhm.
your life will change.
Thank you for doing this work. That's just incredible. And this tool is very powerful. And I can just see the love and the passion you have for it and the clarity that you have about it. So really appreciate your contribution in that way. So for those, yeah. So for those of you who want to learn more about April's work, you might want to have a session with her. She does coaching work. You might want to read up a little bit more about this on her website. You might be interested in her book. Tell us where your website is and how they can reach you.
So my website is just my name, aprilporter.com, and it's AYPRILPORTER. I'm on Instagram sometimes. I will say sometimes, but usually my website or email is the best way to get in contact with me.
Okay, great. And we will have that in the description under the video. And also I have a final slide that at the end of this show where I'll have her information as well. So April, thank you so much again.
Thank you.